The ice fields in the Patagonian Andes, an unknown terrain that is little explored. A team of mountaineers and scientists want to explore these hostile areas. After all, global climate change can be felt more clearly here than in almost any other place in the world. A German scientist leads the extreme expedition in the battle against wind and ice. The aim is to gather data for climate research.
The data is actually very important for us, and we may be able to close some of these gaps that we have up here with these campaigns.
He's supported by 2 professional mountaineers. Their task is to collect samples from regions that no one has ever been to before. With an area of 17,000 square kilometers, the Patagonian ice fields are over 200 times larger than the largest glacier in the Alps. Climate researcher Tobias Sauter wants to investigate the changes here and document the effects. How is climate change affecting these remote areas?
All the research work here actually started as a result of visions, research visions, that something should be done in a region where little research has been done so far and where there is actually still little data. The glacier changes in particular have been poorly recorded so far. There is also a reason why they are poorly recorded, and that is the bad weather. But that's also what makes it so appealing to go there and say, all right, we're going to a region where normal researchers don't actually go. It's a combination of enthusiasm for research and adventure.
Forschungsbegeisterung und eben auch Abenteuer.
Wind Force 8. Before setting off on the big expedition, Tobias Sauter makes a stop at one of the weather stations he has installed on the edge of the Grey Glacier. Although the weather stations run independently, Sauter has to retrieve the recorded data directly on site every 2 years at the latest.
It's always the big moments when you travel several thousand kilometers and then arrive at your station. And you don't know what you're going to find, whether the station is still running or has the station failed, and you're actually just waiting the whole time for the one moment when you read out the data and just hope that everything has worked. Oh dear. Well, so far it's not working, but that could also be a hardware thing, or rather a software problem. Now we have to keep calm. I think we'll get it sorted out.
Yes!
Super! We've done it. We have a connection to the logger, and it's still recording.
The Grey Glacier is relatively easy to reach, which is why a lot of data has already been collected about it. It's located in the southern Patagonian ice field, the 3rd largest ice field in the world after Antarctica and Greenland. So far, Sauter and his team have only been active here. The more remote northern ice field has hardly been explored. Here, at its access point, in Puerto Guadal, professional mountaineers Robert Jasper and Jörn Heller prepare for their expedition to Cerro Hiares. The logistical preparations on site will take a week. Climatologist Tobias Sauter will then join the team. Few mountaineers have more experience in Patagonia than these two. They have been a well-coordinated team for more than 30 years. Robert Jasper is one of the world's leading mountaineers. He's a pioneer of extreme ice climbing. In many lectures, he's particularly committed to the protection of the mountains.
I believe that if you take the energy from nature back with you, then you will also live in an environmentally friendly and more conscious way in the city or wherever you live. And that's the key. If everyone takes more care of nature and their environment, then I think we will have made a big gain in the end.
Tobias Sauter is on his way to Puerto Natales. Here he will meet Ricardo Janya from the Chilean Antarctic Institute, with whom he has been friends for a long time.
Hey, Ricardo, how are you?
He's considered the scientific expert for this region.
Sí, bueno, fue un viaje muy largo, ¿eh? Ya, gracias.
Estamos en un punto singular del planeta.
We are at an extraordinary point on the planet. The lowest tip, the end of South America, and the Antarctic Peninsula are directly opposite each other here, and are the only land masses in the southern hemisphere that lie this far south. Therefore, this is the point where you can explore the change in the border area, which is unique.
Asintótica, es único.
It's clear to everyone here that climate change has already led to dramatic changes in Patagonia in recent years. Ingrid Ebel's plants also feel the effects of this. She has German roots and is Ricardo's wife. As a biologist, she's particularly aware of the consequences for agriculture.
Agriculture suffers the most from the drought. We are 150,000 people, and we need something to eat. We need a healthy diet. And yes, from November on, for example, we have 1 or 2 months without rain. That's a bit difficult.
Tobias Sauter also reaches Puerto Guadal 2 days before setting off on the expedition. Here he meets the mountaineers for the first time, who will take the samples from higher regions for him.
Patagonia really does have one of the most extreme melting rates in the world. In other words, the highest mass turnover. In the lower area, we have melt rates of 10 to 12 meters at the tongue of the glaciers. When I get to the places where I was back then, you simply can't see the glacier anymore. There are often hundreds of meters of altitude that are missing, and sometimes it's receded by the kilometer. In our lives as mountain guides, we observe this every day as the glaciers retreat. Climate change is absolutely present for us.
Puerto Guadal is the last outpost of civilization and the starting point for expeditions to the northern Patagonian icefield. A shallow water boat will take the team through the icy rivers, saving them 6 days of hiking.
Now we've really packed all the equipment. We've checked it several times, but if you've forgotten something, then the expedition could fail.
Robert Jasper and Jörn Heller have planned a total of 4 weeks for the ascent of Cerro Hiades. Tobias Sauter will only accompany the expedition team for the first 10 days. He hopes to at least reach the lower parts of the glaciers during this time. After all, it is still a 2 days walk from base camp. The extremely changeable and unpredictable weather in Patagonia is also decisive for the outcome of the expedition.
I think the first bad weather will come tomorrow. That's why it's important that we don't just sit in our little tents, but that we all have a kitchen here, a common room. For me, the fascination of Patagonia is simply that you have to live up close with the natural elements in this wilderness. I don't think anywhere else can you experience the weather and nature as closely as here.
The goal, the 3,100-meter-high Cerro Hiades. Only 3 expeditions have ever been able to reach its summit. No one before has ever attempted what Jasper and Hella are now planning, the direct ascent of the south flank. Sauter hopes to reach the higher glaciers together with the mountaineers in order to examine the snow conditions there. But even the first part of the route is a real challenge for the scientists. An ice-cold river lies on their path, and they have to cross it.
The rucksack is relatively heavy. I'm not quite sure how many kilos it is, but the scientific instruments that are inside, and then all the ice equipment, I don't think it's going to be easy.
Wow!
Wow, look at that! The situation looks completely different than I thought. I really thought that the glacier would go all the way up here, and the icefall would be a bit wider up there. Now there's a waterfall up there. On the satellite images, the glacier here was 200 meters, so it must have melted away in a year or two. From a scientific point of view, this is a disaster. I mean globally, with the warming or the melting. And now with the expedition. I expected we would go up there on the tongue and then at least be able to go up a bit. But this is a disaster. I don't even know how we're going to do it now.
It soon becomes clear that it's impossible to get any further on the ice. The decay of the glacier tongue is even greater than initially assumed.
You always think the glacier is retreating, but it's not retreating at all. It's decaying. You can see it here too. In principle, it hasn't retreated, but the ice is breaking up into small icebergs and chunks of ice, and then it melts relatively quickly. We should actually be talking about glacier decay rather than glacier retreat. We've now spent 2 years meticulously preparing an expedition, evaluating everything we've received in terms of data and satellite images, and now we're actually faced with the reality of not even getting up the glacier, from the looks of it. Now we just have to activate a plan B. We'd always thought about this rib up there, where all that forest is, up to Hyades. It's super steep and tedious, but we'll give it a try.
The next day, they don't want to give up, not yet. The rubber dinghies were actually only supposed to be used for the way back. Now they serve as a means of finding a way through the labyrinth of the crumbling glacier tongue.
It's really old ice here. The ice comes from the upper part of the plateau. It's very old. The last great ice age was 18 to 20,000 years ago, but it could be much older. We already had ice masses here before the last ice age, so it could be very old. I'm not making any predictions now, but this is very old ice.
The team doesn't get any further with the boat either. Setbacks are part of research. Sauter is disappointed. Now he has to trust that the mountaineers will at least bring him some snow samples from the upper parts of the glacier.
I'll give you the test tubes to put the samples in. Robert and Jörn have a way of penetrating regions where we don't normally go. Our research is almost exclusively limited to the outlet glaciers, which are logistically very easy to reach. We are with the university. We have a research mandate and a teaching mandate. We have our tasks, but we're not extreme mountaineers. That's not the aim. Although it is fun to be out in the field, to go out and collect data, but we also have to weigh up the risks a little. And going out onto the Patagonian ice sheet is not without its dangers. But when we have partners like Robert and Jörn, we get data where we wouldn't otherwise have any, and that is very valuable.
It's back to university for Tobias Sauter. His 10 days are up. He has to give lectures again. The mountaineering team, on the other hand, tries to make its way through the dense undergrowth of the forests near the valley to reach the glacier. From there, they want to climb to the summit of Cerro Hiares, an ascent that no one has ever attempted before. At the end of the first day, they set up camp at the foot of the glacier.
I was just imagining what it would look like if all the glaciers really melted. I can't grip what that would mean. You can already see the beginnings of it down here. A lot of the glacier has already receded. It's been relatively difficult to get up here at all. We went over smooth rocks rising up here, and it's getting more and more difficult to get onto the glaciers. And the crevasses up there look very open. So I'm curious to see if we can get through them.
There is little hope of finding a way through the glacier labyrinth. Nevertheless, they want to continue trying to take samples as they have promised Tobias Sauter.
Down there was only ice on the glacier, but here's a layer of fern, and I think that's interesting for Tobias. He said to stuff as much snow in here as possible. Sample 1.
Each removal is documented precisely so that it can be assigned exactly at a later date.
The left side is dangerous as hell. Left is not up for debate, because of the serac hanging over on the left, which leaves the middle with that rock banana, right?
The higher they get, the more dangerous the route becomes. Serac towers of glacial ice block the way. These can break and bury the climbers under their weight.
To grab our last chance, we just have to take a close look and see if we can get any better information. What we definitely won't do is take a big risk.
But the job that now lies ahead of them is a tough one.
Now it's our turn here, and I'm afraid that this is the end of the line, because there's overhanging ice everywhere at the back, which in principle can also fall down, which is very porous. And there are also huge seracs at the top. There can be constant icefall.
As if nature wanted to confirm the decision, an ice tower collapses. The sun becomes the enemy. The expedition ends for the climbers before they reach the summit region of Cerro Hiares.
It's incredibly warm now. I've never experienced this down here before. I think it is, of course, also a sign of climate change, that the rocks are coming to light more and more, and that the icefalls are also becoming more and more dangerous, because they're becoming more and more fragile.
Despite the disappointment, they were still successful. The mountaineers were able to collect a total of 30 snow samples in the unexplored area. Robert Jasper takes them along to Berlin. Tobias Sauter wants to analyze them at Humboldt University, 5 per altitude region.
I've got 5 samples now. I'd be really interested to know how you want to draw conclusions about the climate from a few snow samples. We analyze the water samples later in the lab and determine the isotope ratio. Isotope ratio of O18, so oxygen isotopes, and O16.
Humid Pacific air flows over the Patagonian ice fields. Precipitation falls in the process. The researchers don't know how much. That's why they compare the samples from the lower areas with those from the higher regions. The analysis of oxygen isotopes is crucial here. It can be used to estimate how much precipitation has fallen on the ice fields. This in turn gives an indication of the extent to which the mass of the glacier is changing.
So that's where you come in. We know roughly how much water vapor comes in from the Pacific, but what we don't know is how much precipitation falls on the Patagonian ice sheets. So far, you've collected samples on the eastern side, on the eastern slope of the Patagonian ice sheet. Now it would be interesting to see what the situation is like further inside the Patagonian ice sheet. That's why I'm glad that you're often out there, and that you can support us a bit.
6 months later, the mountaineers are back in the northern ice field. They want to take samples this time too, but on a different mountain. The Cerro Cristal. This has also hardly been explored. The preparations took 3 months.
It's great because now I can give something back to science, hopefully with the samples, because I think we can get great weather reports, avalanche reports. It's much more professional these days, and we benefit from that. And of course, this is a great opportunity for us.
If they reach the summit, the two would be the second rope team ever to make it up the mountain.
The conditions are not as good as we thought. There's still a lot of snow, and now there's a storm today. Yesterday there were gales of up to 100 kilometers per hour, so it was almost impossible to move at all. But now there's also a huge storm roller over the ice sheet today, and we can't go any further. Yeah, it's very difficult right now.
Tobias Sauter is also back in southern Patagonia at the Grey Glacier. While the mountaineering team collects samples for him on the northern ice field, he wants to experience what his scientific colleagues only know from pictures.
We have satellite images. We can assess the current situation from the satellite images. We also have some meteorological data, so we actually already have a good wealth of data. But when you arrive on site and see how far the glaciers have melted, you still remember what it was like 3 years ago. That's really like a huge blow. And then you're brought back to reality. That's when you first realize what it actually means.
Access to the southern Patagonian ice field is comparatively easy. Using simple methods, Sauter can document the retreat of the glaciers here.
We mark the top of the glacier with the tape. And a year later we come back and we can determine how much ice has melted on the surface of the glacier.
The Sauter team's results to date are worrying. The yellow and red areas show the decay and retreat of glaciers in Patagonia. The ice fields also served the researchers as a kind of advanced test laboratory for the 700 times larger Antarctic. Changes taking place here are also expected to affect the glacier masses at the South Pole in the future, with consequences for the global climate and rising sea levels.
We have water damage here. Okay, so the camera is still running. That's very good news so far. We're going to change the battery now. We'll change the chip card and reset the camera. And then it should actually start working again. The camera currently takes pictures of the glacier front every 3 hours. From the images, we can then derive the flow rate of the glacier on the one hand, and on the other hand, we get information on how much mass, how much ice is breaking off at the front of the glacier. And that is another factor that leads to the loss of ice. We observe things, and there's a great deal of evidence that climate change is happening. And we make these results and findings available to politicians and decision makers, so that we can still achieve this target of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees that we have promised ourselves. And so far, we are doing too little, and it's not enough. And that's pretty sobering. Here are the GPS coordinates for the first sample.
The climbers make rapid progress this time. On the morning of the third day, Robert Jasper and Jörn Heller have already overcome the brittle glacier areas. They're on their way to the higher regions of the inland ice, but another storm is brewing. Gale force gusts sweep across the ice field. Now they have to make the right decision. Their tent would not survive the storm. The two of them dig a snow cave.
Come into the parlor. Boy, it's not quite so stormy here. At least we've made it here now. A nice snow cave, and we needn't really care about the storm outside. Now we just have to check the entrance from time to time to make sure there's enough air. But it looks very good.
Tobias Sauter explores the edge of the Grey Glacier from a boat. In 2019 alone, it retreated by 400 meters.
In recent years, the glacier front was perhaps 40 to 50 meters high. Now it's only 30 meters high. So you can see that the glacier is simply not as powerful as it used to be. And that makes me a little sad, to know that there is actually almost no chance of preserving these glaciers. And future generations will no longer have the chance to see these large glacier masses again. I find that worrying.
The storm has now subsided on the northern ice field, and Jörn Heller and Robert Jasper set off to climb to the summit of Cerro Cristal. On the fourth day of their ascent, the climbers are about to reach their destination with plenty of samples in their luggage. The data collected by the mountaineers may only be a small piece in the large mosaic of climate research, but it contributes to understanding the effects of climate change on the large ice masses of our planet.